Welcome to this special edition of. Are we live? Okay. Welcome to this special edition of Opinion Central. Can we start over? We're live. Welcome to this special edition of Opinion Central. I'm John Diaz, the page editor for the San Francisco Chronicle. With me today is Joe Garofoli, our senior political writer, also the maestro of the famous podcast It's All Political. Also joining me is John McMurtrie, our books editor, who also has his podcast of his own on books. Welcome, John.
Thanks, sir.
Today we're going to be talking about this new James Comey book that's getting so much buzz, A Higher Loyalty, that just came out, and we're here to discuss it, and obviously you'll be able to follow this on other podcasts too. Let me throw it to you, Joe. This book is creating quite a buzz in the political scene.
Absolutely. And in Washington, you want to have some political friends. Comey will make no political friends with this. He is continuing to alienate both left and right with that. We've seen from the interviews and also in the book that he doesn't. Here's the one of the money lines. I'm convinced, in terms of the Clinton email, I'm convinced that if I could do it all again, I would do it the same thing, given my role and what I knew at the time. But I also think reasonable people might have well handled it differently, which is kind of unsatisfying in a way. If you're a Clinton supporter, and even if you're a Trump supporter, I don't get the sense, from reading this from a political perspective, that it's going to give anybody any kind of resolution.
Can I interrupt here? So maybe John is too modest to bring it up, but John's review of the book just went up this morning at sfchronicle.com/books, and you discussed that, I think, in your review, right? What would you make of his defense there in the book?
Well, the interesting thing is, I think no question, James Comey was trying to, knowing that people are not necessarily going to agree with him, both from the Trump people who think he let Hillary Clinton off too easy, and the Clinton people who think that he cost her the election. He's never going to win them over. I think he was trying to at least get them to understand the thinking behind his decision. I think that was maybe the weakest part of the book, and that it's a no-win situation. But there were a lot of fascinating elements of other parts of his life that kind of help explain how he got to the point where he did, and why he made the judgments he did, and frankly why he so despises the President of the United States.
Yeah, and that was almost the surprise to me, and John and I were talking this before we started, was that only the last, 100 pages, 80 pages was about Trump.
Right.
Most of it is about things like his involvement with the Martha Stewart case, his involvement with the mob, prosecuting mob cases. And the Martha Stewart case was really interesting because that's when you first get a hint of how Comey is very cognizant of what the media thinks. He was ready to drop the case. He was like, well, this is like, we could have pled this out, but, he was, and what if I'm going to get a lot of media blowback on this. Should I really do it? But then he's like, well, she lied. And I decided to go.
There's some self-awareness there, of how it's going to play.
Yeah.
There's so many antecedents in his life to what ultimately came. Like in the case of the Martha Stewart case, there was a fascinating story about where he had, in an earlier time, prosecuted a young man for perjury, for a minister, and also he even goes back to when he was high school, where he was bullied. And you can't help but think, knowing his impression of Donald Trump, that the fact that he had been bullied and then he sees this bully in the Oval Office, that had some impact on it.
Yeah, there are a lot of points that they could be in bold, right? They're heavily stressed. So you make that connection. I think in your review also, you say that he leans a little too heavily on making that parallel between mobsters and a certain president you worked for, right? Yeah,
it's fascinating too. Where he writes about the interactions he had with the Gambino family, for instance, and other mobsters, and kind of like the way they regarded personal loyalty more important than any other quality. I think in the way he cast that, he was maybe hit us over the head with a mallet a little too hard on, that Trump is like a mobster. I think if he just laid out the story and then described Trump, I think a lot of readers, including myself, would have realized, wow, Trump is acting just like the mobsters he dealt with.
Right.
I think by doing that, he kind of overplayed his hand a little bit, and in the court of public opinion, people were thinking, well, he's biased against Trump because, he had this glib response. He's like a mobster. But if you read the book and read about the experience he had with mobsters, it really does ring true.
It does ring true, although I'm a little uncomfortable with the, some of these mobsters are the worst of the worst. One guy strangled somebody 30 times. You can say a lot about the president, but as far as we know, he has not strangled anyone with a piano wire. So that was a little uncomfortable to me, and I say that as a paisan. So, but yeah, no, the subtlety is missing. That's what I was curious from you guys. I read your review; it's online right now. It's really good. But how does this read as literature? Because to me it was like, it's a memoir, and it's sort of, there's a lot of draw some religious things into it, and then it's like a rip from the headlines type of thing. But does it work on all those levels, or none, or what?
I think to a certain extent, I have to say I was pleasantly surprised by this book. Ultimately, I didn't know quite. I mean, you look at the cover, right? It looks like this could be on a tombstone in a way. It has a seriousness to it, or with the gray font, it could be on the side of a courthouse, the front of the courthouse. So, and he is a pious, can be a sanctimonious individual, but he was the head of the FBI. You sort of want somebody.
You want someone like that,
yes,
as
a straight shooter. So he's a square, yes, but you forgive him for it, I think, to a certain extent, irregardless of the email business, right? So I'm sorry, you had a point, and I'll.
Well, I was just going to point out, having read a number of these, boring, self-aggrandizing political books. The thing I liked about this that you usually don't see, especially if I compare it to like Hillary Clinton's book, which was basically, a couple pages of saying I take accountability for the election, and then go on hundreds and hundreds of pages about blaming everybody else. James Comey showed some vulnerability in here.
He did.
I think is rare for somebody in public life.
Very self-effacing.
He talked about not only how he had been bullied, but really regrettable incidents that he had when he was a freshman in college, where he participated in the bullying of a classmate in the dorms. So he hardly presented himself as a perfect human being, and that kind of introspection, I think, is rare. I don't know. Obviously, it's doing quite well on the bestseller list. It's up to number 1 already.
Before.
So it's certainly a lot of people are going to read it, and I think if you read the book in its totality, it's going to look a lot different than what you're seeing on cable news.
Yeah, and for political nerds, there's a lot of little tidbits in there. And he does, I like his very human reaction when the first time he goes in the Oval Office, and when he's going up against Cheney and other members of the Bush administration. He said they can feel the blood in my face, and he's nervous. He's visibly nervous, as anybody else would be. So those are kind of nice touches that humanize him a little bit.
There's a moment that was strong, I thought, when he's with Obama, and Obama more or less gently, you can imagine Obama being Obama doing this, he essentially corrects him about this policy, the weed and seed, I think it's called, and how, do you understand, this is a law enforcement term, do you understand how this might offend African American people? So, and you see Comey, the head of the FBI, coming to the realization that maybe we shouldn't be using this phrasing, right?
Yeah, and also Obama lets him down easy after the election, it was after the election, and he said, there's nothing that you've done as FBI director that I feel badly about. I'm still, I'm glad I made the decision to choose you and such. And there's a gentleness about Obama that he talks about throughout the book, and also humor.
Yes.
He said Obama was very funny, and he compares the humor of Obama and George W. Bush. George W. Bush was funny but sarcastic. He's someone cutting. Someone would be the butt of the joke. Where Obama was more of an inclusive humor. It's and sort of more in that way. So these are some neat little insights in there.
I thought as much as anything that this book, if you read it through, is really a primer on leadership. What are the qualities of a leader? And Joe, you mentioned the ability to laugh, not only to laugh at others, but to laugh at oneself. Notice I've been laughing at your jokes too.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you. I need all the help I can get.
But there were a lot of tips in there on leadership, and certainly you saw it in his description of Obama, but also things about like transparency and even different styles of leadership, how they can be effective. Some of the passages I found very interesting were about Robert Mueller.
Yes.
And Robert Mueller being a very effective leader, but also being very different than James Comey. And all I can say is if I were in the Trump White House, it would send chills down my spine to hear about Bob Mueller straight ahead.
He doesn't come across as being cuddly. There's the anecdote about how, well, after 9/11, right? Somebody suggests essentially that he might want to check in with families of victims, and he does this by, it's very perfunctory, right? How's everything? Okay, good, and then hangs up. Next, that sort of thing.
Right. Not a lot of laughs.
No.
Although there was another anecdote where Mueller sets him up. When he's I think Comey was the assistant attorney general,
yeah.
and he's in the White House. And they find that this one terrorist had two jobs in New York, and so George W. So he had told this joke to Mueller in confidence, and then Mueller sets him up in the situation, or not in the Situation Room, I guess in some sort of Oval Office meeting in front of George W. Bush, and he says, "Go ahead, Jim, tell him what your joke was." And he's like,
He's aghast.
He said, the joke was, who says that Bush didn't create any jobs? This guy had two jobs. Right. And so, unfortunately, Bush laughed at
he
that.
did,
Yes.
Yeah, there were all sorts of great behind-the-scenes little anecdotes sprinkled in here. One of them that I found very interesting, in fact, I found actually a cheap shot on Comey's part, was his explanation of why he shut the then Attorney General Loretta Lynch out of the Clinton investigation. And basically saying that as that investigation was just beginning, that some information had come in from a confidential source that if people knew would seriously compromise the perception of the Justice Department. And saying it is not that information has not come out to this day, which I just found eminently unfair to say there's something out there that would really compromise Loretta Lynch without saying what it was.
Right.
But there was also another good Loretta Lynch anecdote in there where after Comey had announced the reopening of the investigation, that she calls him into her office and he's expecting to get chewed out. And she says, "You look like you need a hug," and gave him a hug. And then as they were walking toward the door, she says, because a number of staff people were waiting outside, she said, basically, look like you've been dressed down.
Right.
That was great.
Washington.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You get the sense of how things work back there.
But at the same time, the Lynch thing, honestly, that's like the big news of the book. Did you, in terms of news value? I mean, a lot of this other stuff had been reported in some way or another, or leaked. So that was like the most, in terms of news value, like, oh my God, what is that memo? There's been some speculation of what actually he's referring to, but did you guys see any like news out of this?
Only by matter of increment. I think certainly in terms of the background of James Comey, kind of what makes him tick,
right?
I think was important. He certainly, I think if you read the book, it sort of dispels the idea that he's a partisan. I mean, he talked about Barack Obama and how he had not even voted for Barack Obama, and
but his wife's a supporter.
His wife and daughters.
Yeah,
he talked about how they went to the Women's March.
Right, and big Hillary Clinton supporters too. Yeah.
Yeah, which he decided not to vote in the election. Was very interesting.
That is interesting. I have mixed feelings about people not voting to make a point, but he is one person I think I'd give a pass to for not voting.
And he's revealing that he didn't.
And he's revealing that he didn't vote. Yeah. He and Colin Kaepernick share something. I guess.
And their tattoos, I think.
Yes.
The back tats.
That was the most surprising with the back tats.
That revelation. Yes, I think that was the news of the book, actually.
Joe, I'm interested in your perception. You're obviously plugged in there in the political world as to how this is playing. Is it helping Comey's image? Is it helping the Trump supporters who are certainly the White House and Fox News are very aggressively counterattacking it. Well, what's your thought?
I think I don't know if the book is going to make any difference, because the people read the book will be, people might be more prone to a deeper look into someone. I think what's going to change his image would be the television interviews, and we're just at the begining of those. We had, of course, the Stephanopoulos interview on Sunday, which was humanizing at some point, at some level. I think that he's going to do Rachel Maddow on Thursday, which will be, to see what she drills down on. And I think that the Stephanopoulos interview humanized him in some way, which said, yeah, maybe. I think one of the answers was, he said, why did you come back and report on the Hillary Clinton interview or reinvestigation when you didn't know anything yet? And he's like, well, I don't know. Maybe I felt he tried to explain it that way. So I think the more he does longer interviews like that, it could help him, because he has a nuanced argument here, and he's going to have to need the time to make a nuanced argument. And as we talked about, he's going on book tour also, coming to San Francisco on Monday.
Debut author, I have to throw that in.
Yes.
Debut author James Comey, doing very well as a debut author.
You think he has a future in the business?
His second book, yes. He'll be writing novels and poetry soon.
He's out of scandals though
Carter.
At this point.
Yeah.
he has to go with a new genre.
Oh man.
He's going to have to do a lot more interesting things to top this one.
Yeah.
In terms of, I think in my review I called him the Forrest Gump of politically sensitive issues.
Oh my God! Yeah.
Joe, you mentioned a number. He was also, in terms of during the Bush administration, domestic surveillance. He was right in the thick of that. Torture, and I have to say, in both cases, my perception on the right side.
Yes. Yes.
So he's going on a book tour, but he's really not talking to media, from what I can gather, on this book tour.
He is not.
And I don't say this sour grapes, by no means.
But James Comey, if you're watching this,
yes,
you're invited to
so
come
in
in
terms
here.
of,
there's an extra chair here. There's a fourth chair for you.
I'm 6'4.5" or a little more.
I'm 5'6", so I will not be standing next to you.
He lies about playing hoops, right?
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that
John,
part.
I never asked you. You're 6'4" plus. Did you play basketball?
That's right. And how's the weather up there?
Yeah,
Cool.
the reason I ask it is another of James Comey's admissions in this book is that, of course, being 6'8", the first question people ask you is whether you play basketball. Joe and I have never had that experience.
No one's ever asked, no.
And he actually lied about it.
Muggsy Bogues.
There's only one Muggsy.
IT, right? Isaiah Thomas.
I think he's 5'9". He's a little.
I don't know what.
He's taller than I am. Yeah. So I want to close the loop on this appearance thing that he's doing, because I think the format is interesting. He is doing a lecture format. There's no onstage Q&A with him. It's basically Comey talking for an hour.
The Reverend Comey at the on stage.
The
church begins.
Saint Comey.
It's Saint Comey. Yeah. Well, that's what I'm curious if he comes across a little more saintly, because everybody's memoir. You never look like a jerk in your own memoir. So if he's giving a 1-hour talk on this, it will be interesting to see if it is more of a saintly depiction of himself than in the book. He wasn't too sanctimonious in the book, do you think? I don't know. What did you guys think?
I think he anticipates that argument, right? I think in the preface he deals with it. So
throughout, several times.
Yeah. No, and he, again, self-effacing. He makes fun of himself. So to his credit,
Although there will be some who say that somebody denying their sanctimonious and worrying about their ego to a great degree,
and
in a way, has its own element of sanctimony.
Yes, it's metasanctimonious.
Just coined a term.
Yes, that we did. What else? What do you guys think comes of this next? Do you think that this is going to be? Or is this one of those books that's going to be a big flash and then disappear as books do, like the? Now I'm forgetting the name of the book from
Mr. Wolf,
Mr. Diaz, the Wolf's book.
Fire and Fury.
Yes.
Or in German, I think. I love the German title, whatever that was. It sounds.
Everything sounds.
My apologies to any German speakers out there. I think it's got maybe more legs than that, actually, and I think it might touch people who voted for Donald Trump, to make them think a bit. And if it's selling books, presumably some of those people are going to be reading it.
Do you think what would resonate with a Trump voter here? What do you think that they would take away from this? That
Well, I don't know. The first thing that comes to mind is Trump asks him, I think, at least 4 times about the notorious Moscow hotel incident, saying that there's no truth in there, and yet let me ask once again about it, about this false story. So read into that what you will.
Yeah, I don't know. As someone who's been asked several times to write the go find Trump voters and what does this mean with them, and they say, yeah, whatever. I'm firmly of the opinion now that that the president was right when he said, with my base, I have to shoot somebody in the middle of Fifth Avenue for them to move. And so I'm dubious and I'm cynical on whether it's going to penetrate to that crowd. I think they're just going to still see Comey as in the eyes of whatever the president thinks.
Just a final thought, if I could, and I agree with both John and Joe on this. I think the thing that's going to be so hard for this to sustain, as opposed to, I mean, it's obviously breaking through now. The Comey interviews are getting a lot of attention. But this whole Trump collusion, Russia investigation, Stormy Daniels, things are breaking so profoundly, so routinely, that who knows, a week from now, something crazy could come out. Right now we've got the Michael Cohen raid and all the reverberations from that. I think it's very hard for any particular angle to stay in the news, stay in the public consciousness right now.
Yeah, you might be so lapped by the news that this would be old.
True enough.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much for watching this edition of Opinion Central with me, John Diaz, the editorial page editor, with Joe Garofoli, the senior political writer here at the Chronicle, and the maestro of all things.
I like that, maestro. I like that.
It's all political.
I'm going to steal that.
One of my favorite podcasts. John McMurtrie, our book editor, you read it every Sunday.
John.
Superb job with that, and also has the books podcast. And for this edition of Opinion Central, and for those of you watching on It's All Political and the books podcast, have a good afternoon.